Welcome to the Practice Podcast, conversations probing the nature of practice. I'm your host, Dave Fearon. Kate Emery, quite an amazing person. You'll hear me suggest that what brings Kate to mind with me is someone who starts with a beautifully prepared blank canvas and then picks up her brush and her palette and begins to make on that canvas the image of what's in her mind. This is not just beautiful pictures, which she is painting, but also two very beautiful organizations, which she brought from her mind into the world, and they're still performing, doing pretty impressive things. So this is the artist of organizational behavior and the artist of fine paintings, and a really interesting person to listen to. So I'll stop talking so you can do that. Kate Emery. Well, this is a moment that I've been looking forward to for weeks, and Peter Vale was also looking forward to until he could no longer be with us. Kate Emery, who has many, however she defines her practice, I know that she's very clearly fits the way of thinking that Peter and I have introduced a few times. In fact, let me remind the listeners what that is. Practice is the conscious ability, fairly consistently, to produce intended results. Now, if we stopped at that, and interruptions occur, and the results still matter, so you keep going, and to do so across a range of circumstances, and to do so while growing and changing oneself to meet the changing circumstances in which one's practice exists. So, Kate, we could pick up any one of your practices. We're a business founder and CEO, founder and chairwoman of Reset Connecticut Social Enterprise Press, or the one that particularly fascinates me at this moment, painter, artist. So you pick where you want to start talking, and then we'll have a conversation.
Well, I love what you talked about in terms of the ability to produce results across a wide range of circumstances, and I think for me it has been the circumstances are sometimes internal and sometimes external, but listening to those and, as you said, following your heart and building from there, to me is the most rewarding and probably the most productive and impactful, when you can combine the desire to do something on the outside, but it's coming from something that's going on the inside, and that has certainly been the case for me.
I think the growing and changing oneself goes along with that then, because the inside is what we can grow and change, even though in your instance you've grown companies, you've grown a wonderful nonprofit. The whole notion of having it aligned with your heart's values is very, very important. And here's an image, Kate, that I thought of when I thought of you, titles, so I won't look forward to for weeks, and Peter Vale was also looking forward to until he could no longer be with us. Kate Emery, who has many titles, so I won't use the first few minutes running through all the titles, but I can say that one of the many reasons we're focusing on Kate Emery today is that she is a practitioner's practitioner. She knows practice from the heart out. However she defines her practice, I know that she's very clearly fits the way of thinking that Peter and I have introduced a few times. In fact, let me remind the listeners what that is. Practice is the conscious ability, fairly consistently, to produce intended results. Now, if we stopped at that, we put the word fairly consistently because we understand mistakes are made, things happen, interruptions occur, and the results still matter. So you keep going, and to do so across a range of circumstances, and to do so while growing and changing oneself to meet the changing circumstances in which one's practice exists. So, Kate, we could pick up any one of your practices. We're business founder and CEO, founder and chairwoman of Reset Connecticut Social Enterprise Press, or the one that particularly fascinates me at this moment, painter, artist. So you pick where you want to start talking, and then we'll have a conversation.
I love what you talked about in terms of the ability to produce results across a wide range of circumstances. And I think for me, it has been the circumstances are sometimes internal and sometimes external. But listening to those and, as you said, following your heart and building from there, to me, is the most rewarding and probably the most productive and impactful when you can combine the desire to do something on the outside, but it's coming from something that's going on the inside, and that has certainly been the case for me.
I think the growing and changing oneself goes along with that then, because the inside is what we can grow and change, even though in your instance, you've grown companies, you've grown a wonderful nonprofit. The whole notion of having it aligned with your heart's values is very, very important. And here's an image, Kate, that I thought of when I thought of you. I picture a really nicely prepared blank canvas on an easel, and you bring yourself to that canvas. You have your palette. I know you do oils, I believe, right?
Yeah.
and you pick your brushes. Now there's no paint by numbers on that canvas, so that right away specifies how different you are than a business person who follows the numbers of others and fills in the colors as directed. You started with a blank canvas when you started a Walker Group. You certainly started with a blank canvas when we started Reset Connecticut Social Enterprise Trust. And now you're having some fun and some serious results from blank canvases with a real brush and palette. Is that somewhat the picture of Kate Emery that you would want listeners to remember? Someone who can look at a canvas and see what should be on there and then make it happen.
Well, I would love for that to be the case. But I think that it's interesting you bring that up, because we've just been discussing that, my husband and I, in terms of trying to figure out what the definition of, a painter is. And are you a painter if you are not painting? So I can start to get angst, and I can start to feel guilty if I'm not in front of that easel with brush in hand, putting paint to canvas. And the reality is, the painting process and the company building process and the nonprofit starting process, cause process, whatever organization or process you want to talk about, right? They all have many, many facets and many stages. And I think we can easily get caught up on the whatever in our mind is the definition of doing. Am I a business when I'm just thinking about it? Or can I be a business if I don't like all aspects of the business? Or what if I haven't thought it all through yet? And I know when I'm painting, there'll be a concept that comes to mind, and I have to noodle with it, and I have to sketch. And in my view, yes, that is arting. I am creating, even though at that point I might have a stylus in my hand or an eye pencil in my hand, but I don't have a brush in my hand yet. Mm-hmm. So, I decided it's like running a marathon, where you're not just a marathon runner when you're running a marathon. You're there when you're doing sit-ups or running sprints or resting when the day calls for rest of your muscles. So there's all different phases and aspects of it. And the trick is figuring out what needs to be done now and putting your mind toward that. And if it's something that you're not capable of doing, find the people that can help you do that, and together you can create something wonderful. And that's what's happened with my business when I was in my 20s. Was I liked programming, and so I thought that's what the business would be about, is just Kate Emery programming for people who needed programs written.
Oh, I
and
get it.
and it and it built from there. And Reset started as a what can we do to encourage other businesses to think about having something beyond the profitability, the bottom line being the only thing that matters to a company. And painting has been about, what can I do that will bring a little bit of beauty into the world and provide me with the therapy that I needed, that the painting provides. So it's all sort of, like you said, it's the range of circumstances, and it's what you need and what you have at the time.
Doing so while growing and changing Kate Emery
Yes.
from a 20-some-year-old programmer to a person who, as you, in a sense, stroked your way into that business, you know, and you saw more and more of that canvas. Perhaps all you saw initially was a postage stamp, but
Yeah.
over time, that business became more of the kind of middle mediator between technology and your business customers, which they couldn't particularly grow on their own. So without
I
going
painted
into,
myself into a few corners as
well, I
well.
was going to say, I was going to torture that analogy just a little more and
Yeah.
say, were there times when you just said, okay, that's it. I don't want to see any more canvas. This is a manageable
Yeah.
company. There's three of us here. We're all busy. And now
All
it's,
right.
it's a much bigger company and a
Yeah.
very highly respected company and
Mm,
a benefit corporation. I mean, and
yes.
perhaps we could talk a little bit about that. Also, though, while you are a painter, you're a painter while thinking about Reset, because you're still our chairperson and you're still chairman of your company, even though you have two wonderful co-CEOs running it. Uh,
Sure.
uh,
Sure.
Also, though, while you are a painter, you're a painter while thinking about Reset, because you're still our chairperson and you're still chairman of your company, even though you have two wonderful co-CEOs running it. You've got three major practices still living and still having more paint on the palette and more room on the canvas. How does that feel?
Um, so I also have a son, and
Oh,
so I
yes.
guess it feels like having four children. So, and and as any parent knows, you have the first one and you think, oh, I get it. I know what they're all about, and I've got this thing figured out. And then you have the second, who's entirely different from the first, even though the same parents brought them up. And you start to recognize each one has, a life of his own and requires a different kind of caretaking and upbringing. And certainly that's the case. David required slightly different um, planning and nurturing than did Reset, and as did the Walker Group, and as does painting. So it's kind of fun having such wildly different children at different stages of their lives to be involved with. And I
You,
say that, and that's Dave is 21 and off in the world on his own and having a ball. Um, but that experience helped me immensely. As a matter of fact, if I were to pick a skill set for a up and coming CEO, I would say try being a parent, because that is a lot, has a lot of the things that you need. And frankly, what I'm seeing now with both Reset and Walker is that dance that we've had to play with Dave in terms of providing support and nurturing and letting go and pushing out of the nest sometimes, and other times sort of trying to pull them back in. All that stuff is so relevant to, I want Walker to succeed as a business, as a company that will continue to give back to the community. And right now, 1/3 of our distributed profits go to employees, 1/3 to the community, and I want that to continue. If I'm going to have that happen beyond my existence here, I need to I need to be that good parent that can do that letting go. And likewise with Reset, to have Reset continue to grow and provide resources and communities such that social enterprise entrepreneurs get the support they need to launch, scale, and grow. If it's going to continue to do that, then it's got to learn to live beyond Kate Emery. And so that's a huge part. And the painting, I think that goes where I go. So that's a slightly different child, but um,
Yeah, that's
similar in
beautiful.
other respects.
I told you before the call that without Peter in physical presence, I have kind of a third ear that I can almost hear what he'd be saying. And when he heard you say that you ground your understanding of the other enterprises you're involved in the experience of being a mother, in one of our podcasts, he gave quite a bit of time and real intensity to the problem or the process of mothering of as a practice that, you know, threw in dads too, but I think he focused a lot on mothers and how significant mothers are and how completely engaging that practice is when you're serious about it, and most mothers are. So that was interesting. I heard that. And the other was that he said in my head, he said, now, David, Kate's and Steve's son, isn't he a whitewater champion? Isn't he a kayaker and going around and teaching other people to ride on the whitewater? Does Kate know about my notion of permanent whitewater? So in a way, David's out there and he's in an area where there's certainly a lot of change and risk and reward, you know, for the results that he wants to achieve. So is Walker Group. You're in a time when you're a business, there's no business that can sit back and go, we're all set,
Mm.
given the economic tragedy that we're experiencing. And then with Reset, we're just praying that we'll be able to be available again physically in our location when people with big ideas and big hearts will come in and say, I'd like to start a business to make a particular impact on life or in this community. So let's talk a little bit about those changing circumstances. There's a lot of water flashing by us right now and certain rocks up ahead that we might hit. How are you feeling? How are you keeping, I assume, calm? Or is this just for the camera?
um, I heard something just recently where somebody said, "Here's a one word mantra that you can use to stop being critical or paranoid or different sort of negative responses." Is whenever you hear something or experiencing something that like throws you, instead of saying, "Oh no," or whatever other choice of words you normally use when you encounter negative situations, force yourself to say good, and then think of why it might be good, because there often, or perhaps usually, is some other sort of silver lining or flip side of the coin where you can see, actually, this will help me develop my patience skills. Or, you know, the pandemic, gee, I get to stay home and paint. That's a tragedy, huh? Um, so
Or bake
there's
bread.
the
You,
silver.
you're an oven builder and a bread baker. So I throw
There you
that in
go.
on.
Well,
But I love
so
that.
it
I
does.
love that notion.
Yeah, so I like that, and I do think that one of the silver linings of this, actually, I remember when I was transforming the Walker Group into a social enterprise, and we had changed the bylaws to say that we would split the profits the three ways and stuff, and was starting to get really jazzed about the whole idea of social enterprise and wanting to talk about it more to people. And this was in 2005 or six when we started doing that, and then when Reset was getting going. And when I would be out and about in the community talking to folks and talking about this great idea that I had, as often as not, perhaps more often than not, I would be met with um, rolling eyeballs and it sort of like, why on earth would you want to do that? I mean, everything's going so swimmingly.
Yep.
And then we had 2007. And after that crisis, I didn't get as many eye rolls. I got a lot more people saying, yeah, you're right. Something's wrong here, and we need to do something about it. And this pandemic that we're all experiencing is the same kind of thing. I think that it is waking us up to the fact that has been here all along, but has been hidden by a number of different things. We're all recognizing the fact that the way we have been doing things isn't isn't working, isn't effective, isn't kind, isn't helpful. And I believe that once the dust settles and once we can pick ourselves up and dust ourselves off, I think there's going to be a lot more open eyes and a lot more readiness to embrace some of the things that Reset has been all about. So that's kind of a exciting silver lining, so to speak.
I love that notion of, oh, good. And it does tie very directly into two thoughts. One, back to our basic definition. If you're going to change and grow, you have to be in a gap. You have to see a gap where your knowledge and your ability to use that knowledge no longer works, which I think will be the case for tens of thousands of the companies that have had it fairly easy. It's not
Yes.
going to work anymore. So, oh, good, they're going to have to learn something.
Hmm.
And the other thing is that I read a memo that Peter wrote in 2002, about a year after he was paralyzed by a surgical accident, and it was like anything that I've ever read from Peter or heard him say. It was very introspective and had some very unexpected twists to it. So the gist of what I'm thinking of at this moment was, here's a person who was top of the game, known nationally, internationally, traveling consultant, teaching in an endowed chair at College of St. Thomas, and life was sweet back in his hometown. And then he had this accident. So a lot of people reached out to him over time, and he responded to one of my reaching outs, and he wrote this very thoughtful memo. And he said, I really expected to be terribly, terribly angry and basically wanted to shut myself down. But he said, at this point, I'm learning. I'm learning a whole
Mm.
lot of new things,
Wow.
not just about myself, but the nature of faith and spirituality. And he said, I'm just a very, he said, I'm analytical to the point of abstraction. And yet, at the same time, I am interested in anything around me, even though my circumstances have shrunk down to a very little space. And
Mm.
I'm forever curious.
Wow.
So a person who would say, oh, good, has to be at least curious about
Yes.
what can come of this. And I think that's you. I think that's
Mm.
you in every instance that we've discussed so far, from sketching a little bit on that canvas and saying, that's an interesting shape, or, what's my influence? And just playing with it and knowing that you can paint it over if it's not quite the way you want
Hmm.
it. And in
Yep.
many ways, we've painted over a lot of reset. I was very happy to have been on your board from the earliest days. And so I know how many times we sketched it out, called it a plan, then stuff happened. And, a lot of time you'd say, well, this is it. We got to pack it in. We can't do this anymore. But you believed in the purpose of reset. So of course we kept going. And the same with Walker Group. I'm sure that after 2007, even Walker Group had to find out how to pay the bills for a while. So yes,
Hmm.
but that
Yep.
sense of Peter is completely, in my estimation, ruined his normal life was, and that was 2002. Now in 2020, just a few weeks ago, he passed away, and he passed away the day after he texted me. I said, he said, I'm sorry, I can't make, we were going to record a conversation on that Tuesday. He said, I'm not going to make it back to the apartment. I'm sorry. He was in the hospital for the second time in 3 weeks. He said, but I'm going to be back. I'm looking forward to it. He said, thank you for your kind patience, which when I read that
Wow.
now makes me really sad. But
Hmm.
he never stopped being curious and
Yeah.
hopeful and and had enormous faith.
Yep.
That's partly
Wow.
why I dedicate every one of these conversations going forward with people like you, who I believe have many of those same qualities in that sense that you, as you said earlier, start from the heart and work out. And, uh, and that's really what this
Well, and
podcast series has been,
and
from the heart out, learning our way.
uh-huh. Well, and Dave, I think what you say about him is, boy, I'm get more bummed that I didn't get to meet him. But I think that what you're saying is so true in terms of his being curious as a compelling factor, because I think that what I hear a lot is that you need to have the strength of, I don't know, willpower or drive or these other sort of like brute force kind of things,
Mm-hmm.
which there are days you need that. But I think it's that curiosity, and that comes from finding something that intrigues you and you want to explore more and see where it takes you. And sometimes you have no idea how it's going to help or how it's going to influence whatever your day job is, so to speak. But if you give yourself the freedom to be curious and to explore it intellectually or on your feet or however with your hands, um, you explore it, and more often than not it comes back around and feeds the other aspects of your life as well, and expands the whole universe that is your life.
That's beautifully
So,
said. Yeah, I feel it exactly how you said it. And we're in this era now where we have the maker movement. We have
uh-huh.
a maker center in downtown Hartford. It's sheltered right now, but it'll be opening up. And as I've been thinking about the nature of practice all these months, I think what we are is the makers of our
Yes.
practices. No one can, here, okay, let me just slide this down into your tube, and now you are a painter, you are a CEO, you are
Right.
anything. And so the making of ourselves, the question, what are you made of yourself, is something that's really unique about an individual building a practice, or even a
Hmm.
system of practices like you have, which do uh, reinforce each other. And we talked about this in several of the conversations Peter and I had. I was, I think I mentioned to you a couple of times, maybe ad nauseum, that I had taken up golf after about nearly 40 years of saying, I'll never play that damn game again. And so I said, well, that's one of the things I can do with time. I can see if I can play that damn game. Now I haven't gotten all that much better at all, but I went from playing golf to becoming a golfer. And how do I know I'm a
Hmm.
golfer now? I know on my own terms that I really am eager to get back out there
Mm-hmm.
and reconnect myself to that particular environment. And yet I know the circumstances will have changed when I finally get there. But
Mm-hmm.
you feel it. It it,
Yeah.
it's not at all serious as far as anything else I do, but it's wonderful to feel
Mm-hmm.
like I'm doing something that I said I'd never do again. And I don't know, when did you find the painter? And did you start that at an earlier part of your life and and rediscover it? How did
Well,
that
I
go?
yes, so I've painted for probably 30 years now. But it was always just sort of betwixt and between the work and
Raising a
Dave and
son and being a good
yeah,
wife.
so it was a fun thing to be doing, and I didn't have a whole lot of time to devote to it. So it wasn't until started thinking about okay, transitioning the day to day from Walker to Jess and Todd, who are the new co-CEOs, and then that gave me a lot more time to figure out what I wanted to do, and so I realized that I really wanted the art to be a bigger part of it. And so then, back to the sort of practice idea, there was a I often think there ought to be some workshops or courses for people going into retirement because there's a whole practice development in terms of okay, what do you want this to look like? What are the routines that you're going to have?
Hmm.
What are goals? What are the things that you want to explore? And
Exactly.
so that was for me a big piece of the of of that stage was sort of figuring out okay, where did I want to go with it? And then as we were talking about before, it's was sort of a natural thing of saying, well, I've got this art that I love doing, and I'm not sure where it's all going, but if it can be used to be helpful, then that makes it so totally cool. And then started talking with some organizations that were game for doing an auction of one of my pieces or whatever, and one thing's led to another, and so that's become a very satisfying way of creating art that makes a difference. And again, it is therapy for me in that it helps me either focus on some of the more lovely parts of life or to kind of play around with some of the angst and drama that I'm trying to deal with as well,
Yeah,
that we're all trying to deal with as well.
absolutely. Yeah, we're moving down to our last few minutes, but I have to invoke another Peter Vale insight that he gave in a book called Learning as a Way of Being. He devoted a lot to the value of being a beginner again.
Mm,
Now, you're either involuntarily a beginner again, as almost everyone will be because of the pandemic. You just forced. You got to start over. You got to throw away the old
mm,
textbook. It's gone. On the other hand, you can voluntarily become a beginner again. You bringing painting to a higher status in your agenda, and me uh, making myself a golfer. So, but the feeling of beginning again as a beginner after you've had other great successes is really tough because you kind of have to humble yourself and say, "Hey, it's like I tried to say about this podcast. I'm learning this every minute. Um,
mm,
and so here's my question back to you. It's not all about me, David. I heard Peter say that. Peter, I get it. I get it. I speak to to the spirit. You undertook uh, an adventure of bringing yourself and Steve to Italy before all of this happened, and and went under study, took on teaching from others, and you must have been among some of the really people whose paintings were like, whoa. And there you were, a very fine painter, but probably saw us quite a bit of gap when you looked around those museums and saw what people honored as the high art. So how did it feel starting and essentially being a big beginner in Italy?
I love being a beginner. And to me, it's almost the best time. I mean, I remember So I did whitewater kayaking back in the day and loved it. And the thing I loved about most was the the steep learning curve that every day you can be better than you were the day before. Once you're an expert, the increments upward are much smaller and so in that beginning stage, it's awesome. And actually, when I injured my shoulders kayaking, and then I could no longer sort of do some of the things that I wanted to do, and it lost the fun for me because I wasn't continuing to improve and learn.
There
So it
you
was
go.
time to move to something else. And with the painting, I'm quite sure I will die a beginner in terms of that learning curve. There's still a huge amount that I learned from painting to painting. Um, and I love that. And I don't know whether that's just the curiosity. Where I think it comes from? I think it comes from being gentle with yourself and probably before that having really good parents that are supportive of the learning, not the achieving.
Ah,
And
what a
and
cool
to me
idea.
that's been huge.
Yeah, there's so much about what are your accomplishments, what have you achieved, and all that,
Yeah.
sort of the resume, and uh,
Yeah.
and what Peter and I would say about practice is, boy, those results that you're going for, they've got to be increasing or somehow, because if it's all about finishing and ending and I'm done, you basically put your practice to sleep, or at least that practice to
Exactly.
sleep, as you just said with the kayaking. So as an
Well, the very
educator,
definition of practice, right? You're
yeah,
you
it's do it's
you're getting better.
it is getting better, and everything you do is like a moment of practice. And I think the ultimate for it is that it it becomes a way of life,
Yes.
a way of life, to continually give yourself opportunities to take it to a practice level and then see where it takes you. And as a teacher, and as Peter was, in many ways you are, that's who we look for, that in the people who turn to us. We look for
Yeah.
that sort of intention, that give me a little push, give me a little of this, show me how to
Hmm.
find a theory, but then I'm going to take it from there. And I,
Yes.
I always look for that in my students. And some of the ones who I've recorded in earlier podcasts are just like that. And now they're in their 40s and early 50s. And they're like, I, I just, I got a little push, a little something. You showed interest in me.
Yes.
And the grade was almost somewhere down in the bottom of the pile of what,
Right.
what was important to me. What was important is that we got ourselves thinking together, and then I felt more encouraged about my own thinking, and off I went. And you've developed
Yes.
employees that way, Kate, and also our research staffs in the same way. We certainly can't have them say, "Okay, I'm at my level, I'm cruising."
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and my advice would be to anybody who's who's interested is to welcome being a beginner and be a beginner in as many things as you can find, because different things will matter or will resonate or will intrigue you more at one time or another. And if I hadn't started art 30 years ago, it wouldn't be as satisfying to me right now to come back to it. And so it's there's always room for growing, and the more things you have percolating and that you're a beginner at and willing to keep sort of plugging away, the I think the happier you end up being as time goes on and you're looking for ways to explore.
and guess who gets to manage that? You, the person, you get
Mm,
to manage that. You can either
right.
be not curious, or you can expand your curiosity. You can either stick in one note and keep playing that note over and over again. You have a choice to do that. But as
Exactly.
we close up, back to the very beginning of our conversation, practice is the conscious ability to fairly consistently produce intended results. So the word conscious is key. When you
Hmm.
know yourself, You know what you're good at and what you'd like to be good at that's different. And you have to consciously choose to set some goals or results
Mm-hmm.
that you want to achieve and go for them. But just
Yeah.
recognize that on the way, there are twists and turns and bumps and setbacks and wonderful breakthroughs and surprises. And what a hell of a way to live a life, huh?
Yes. Yes.
And I call that the life of Kate Emery.
Well,
So
so far, so good.
yeah,
Having
I
fun.
agree. I agree. Okay, thank you, Kate, and
Oh,
I'll
thank you,
see.
Dave. All right. Sounds good.